What's up, creeps, and welcome to the Let's Talk Horror channel with me, BP. On this video, I'm going to give you my personal favourite top 10 found footage movies. Now, the found footage subgenre or genre within cinema is so interesting. It started a long time ago and then sort of pretty much stopped and then came back on a big occasion like we all know and that I will get into. But one of the other things that I think makes it so interesting is why we keep going back to it, or why horror itself as a genre keeps going back to it and trying to revive it or look at new ways to keep it going. And I think a lot of that comes down to this primal sort of instinct, this primal animalistic viewpoint that we have when we're seeing and watching these movies, because their depiction of what we see on the screen is supposed to be real. No matter how crazy it is, we're supposed to believe, and sometimes we do believe, that what we're watching is happening. And that is a really interesting element to any movie that you can have, and found footage quite clearly and obviously has always done that the best. No matter what style it's done, whether it seems to be, you know, just handheld with the worst sort of camera that you can possibly buy to give it that sense of gritty realism, or whether it's done in a big Hollywood blockbuster style, it's still incredibly interesting. When we watch them, we still get that primal animalistic reaction to them every time we see them. So I thought, why not give you my top 10? So let's get into it. So the first one on my list was sort of what I was talking about earlier. Sometimes they're depicted as big budget found footage movies. Sometimes they're not. And this one definitely is. And it probably does it better than any big budget found footage horror movie I'm talking about. And it also is the depiction of also what I was talking about in regards to that primal fear that we get watching these movies, because this one is about a big giant alien monster. Obviously, I'm talking about Cloverfield. Cloverfield is a ridiculously fantastic movie, and what I love about this film is that it still feels and continues to be to this day very grounded and still very gritty, but in this big movie. It feels like a huge Hollywood action, horror, thriller movie, but yet still feels confined, still feels very claustrophobic. And I think that's something that found footage does really well. And within this, we get, on a cinematic level and on a technical level, really masterful filmmaking by Matt Reeves. This film is stunning to look at, no matter how grainy it gets, no matter how low budget it can look. What's happening within the screen that we're watching is incredible. Whether it's an empty street with a empty horse chariot thingy walking through it, whether it's a building on its side that they've got to then venture up, whether it's the monster itself. It's insane what they managed to achieve in this film, but yet still keeping it real, keeping it feel confined and claustrophobic. They did a great job with Cloverfield, so it's definitely going to be on this list. And it's a film I think ends up in quite a few people's lists. And it is also one of those films that seems to be a bit of a gateway for a lot of people, because, yeah, it's not full horror, but kids can sort of get hold of this film, watch it, really enjoy it, and it can start them on, you know, a slightly different path maybe. But Cloverfield is a fantastic movie. So the next one on my list is actually two, because I don't want to separate them because it takes a space away. And I mean, they're the same franchise. So Creep 1 and Creep 2. These films are absolutely fantastic. And although I may probably be on my own, I'm actually in the camp where this is like very few films that have a sequel. I believe the sequel to be better, but that takes nothing away from the first film. These films are essentially what is a perfect element or a perfect way of using found footage to give us this fright factor, and as I said, it ignite this primal fear within us. You've got a guy who's a serial killer, and somebody goes to film in the first one, and then shit happens. In the second one, what I really love, and I think it's really clever, is how they try to evolve this story by trying to almost give you sympathy for the killer. But ultimately, you know that he's a bad person who's done bad things. So they really switch it up in a different sort of way that I'd seen before. But once again, this is a film that's very different to something like Cloverfield, because this isn't a big Hollywood budget found footage movie. This is a small, independent found footage movie that relies on fantastic filmmaking, original and unique ideas, but also ridiculously amazing performances. The thing with found footage is it's a depiction of something that's real, or even if it's not, or it's not trying to be, there's elements of it that have to be there for it to work. And one of the main things with found footage is you have to have very, very believable performances. And Creep and Creep 1 is definitely no exception to that. So there was no reason or no way I could not have these on the list. So Creep 1, Creep 2, if you haven't seen them, you've got to, but no, they're 100% on my list of favourite found footage horrors or movies. So next up, I have a film that a lot of people consider not only the scariest found footage movie ever made, but also a lot of people consider it to be the scariest film that they have ever seen. And that, I'm obviously talking about Wreck. Now, I'm just talking really about the first one. The other ones, yeah, they're fun, they're watchable. You can just, put them on and just enjoy. This one, the first one, is one of those films that makes it a lot more difficult to enjoy because it is non-stop horror. It is non-stop in-your-face action. It's insane. There's very little downtime in this movie, but once again, it's something that we felt like we hadn't seen before, done in an expertly crafted way. Once again, the performances are amazing. The look of the film is fantastic, and it really, really keeps you on the edge of your seat. That once again, we're sort of put into this hyper reality, or this, different sort of world where there might be something there where zombies exist, no matter whether they come from being bitten or whether they just rise from the dead, or within this there's a lot more to the story as to how they come to be. But we don't have that in the real world, but they do a fantastic job, thank God, but they do a fantastic job at making you feel like this world is the one that you could live in. And that is why sometimes in found footage movies like this, they're so expertly crafted to do that. There's so much talent behind the scenes that it elevates what you're watching. And Wreck is definitely one of those. And, it's just one of those films that from the start to the end, you're on the edge of your seat. It's a great one. And I can see why it's on so many people's lists of scariest movie ever made. So next up on the list is one that I don't normally see too much pop up, but there's something about this film that really works for me, and that is The Last Exorcism. This film, I can sort of see why a lot of people have a problem with it, because it does feel a lot more scripted. It feels a little bit more directed in regards to it being sort of this sporadic sort of, the camera moves here, the camera moves there, that sort of classic found footage feel. It does feel a bit more cinematic, a bit more set up. But I really, once again, enjoy the idea of this, and found footage movie set during an exorcism or the events of an exorcism. It's something that's really interesting to me. And how would that go about? What would unfold if that sort of thing was to happen and you were around it and all you had was a camera? Would you continue to film it? Would you not? Would you want to document it? Would you not? I mean, that's something you could say for pretty much any found footage movie. Like, why do they keep filming it? But then we wouldn't have a film. So something like The Last Exorcism is a really good example of a good idea with good performances, but also if you can take yourself out of the way where it's like, okay, is this too technical? Is this too cinematic? If you can just go along with it, it's a visually stunning movie that does a really good job, but it still has that element of grittiness. It still has that element of being grounded, once again, enhanced by the fact that it's all handheld and found footage. So Last Exorcism, I really enjoy it. I think it probably needs to be seen a lot more than it is to appreciate it. So if you haven't seen it, go and watch it. Next up on the list is a movie that still to this day blows my mind how they managed to do it on such a small budget and make it look like how it does. It's insane. The set pieces, the way that it's shot, what they managed to achieve on screen is insane, and that is Afflicted. This film is a fantastic movie. It is the type of film that even if it wasn't found footage, it would work and it would still be an incredibly interesting idea. This one is essentially a found footage vampire movie, but what does that once again look like in the real world through a lens? And that once again is an interesting thing within this movie, but it's an interesting thing within found footage. What does real look like? And this film does a really good job once again. It doesn't hold back any punches. It goes where it needs to and doesn't apologise to it. But once again, it's original, it's unique, and it's a very good way, once again, of storytelling by using found footage. It once again aids the story to bring to us, the viewer. But like I said, what blows my mind is that the set pieces in this film is insane, and I've got no idea how they were filmed or how they were allowed to be filmed in the places that they were and the way they were with such a small budget. It's something that you could probably easily find online, but you know, I haven't. I couldn't be bothered. But once again, because when you're watching the film, you're fully immersed, and that's once again the thing with found footage. If you can feel or you get fully immersed into the environment that you're in, it doesn't matter if it's about aliens or monsters or vampires or werewolves or whatever it is. It doesn't matter. If you are immersed and in this world and you feel claustrophobic and, you know, you have this sort of tension within yourself when you're watching it, it's done its job. And Afflicted is still one of those films where you're very interested also in finding out where it's going to go. So Afflicted is definitely on the list. So next up, I have a film that is directed by one of my favourite directors working today. That is Ti West. And you're thinking, I don't remember a found footage Ti West movie. Well, that's because it's a film that hasn't really been seen or talked about as much as what I thought it would. This is a really, really good film. In fact, it is one of my favourite found footage movies. Once again, another film that could have been made, you know, with the full cameras, with the full setup. It didn't have to be found footage, but it is another reason as to why found footage can aid the delivery of the movie. It can be what the film is and depict that to you, but it makes it scarier. Now, The Sacrament, which is the movie, I don't know if I said, but The Sacrament, it is loosely, or really is, based on the Jonestown Massacre and the horrible events that happened on that day. None of the characters or the same characters or the names of them are involved within it, but it is quite clearly that. And that gives you the other sense of tension and dread throughout it, because, I mean, you know what's going to happen, but you don't know how it's going to happen or how Ti West is going to depict the events of what happened. The Sacrament is a fantastic movie because, once again, it ticks every box. It is classic Ti West, where the tension, it builds up slowly, and then when it happens, it doesn't stop. And you are on the edge of your seat, you're sweating buckets, you can't believe what you're seeing and what you're watching. It goes 1 to 11 whenever he wants, and it doesn't stop. And this film is incredibly violent at parts. It has some really, really shocking imagery, as you would come to expect from something that's based on these horrible events that happened. And one of the other things as well is that you've got fantastic performances. Once again, something that's pivotal to a found footage movie. It's insane, this movie. It's one of those films, once again, like I said, that not many people mention or speak about too much, but as a horror, as a found footage movie, it is definitely one of those films that when you watch, you find it very difficult to forget what you've seen afterwards. It's done expertly, as everything is done by Ti West. So once again, another film, if you haven't, to check out. So next on the list is a movie that nearly didn't make it on. So when I do these lists, obviously there's a lot of movies. There's a lot of found footage movies, and which ones do I enjoy, and why do they deserve to be on the top 10? And this one was one that nearly didn't make it. But the reason it did is once again because of the originality, the uniqueness of the movie, but also the feeling that you get when you watch this movie. Now, I'm talking about the last horror movie. Now, the last horror movie is intense. Needless to say, it's very intense. If you've seen this film, you'll know what I mean. And the reason that it's intense is that because all it is essentially is that a serial killer puts out an ad to someone to go and film what he's doing, him going around and killing people, and document this. And the thing is, what makes it scary is that within the real world, this is something that could happen, and hopefully it never does, but this is something that could happen. There's nothing really stopping this from happening. And that's a scary, scary thought. So when you put that into a movie, and a found footage movie, it makes it even scarier. And it raises the stakes of what you're watching. Now, one of the things with this is the performance from the main guy, the serial killer within the movie. He is like a English version of Patrick Bateman, but very theatrical. So sometimes he sort of takes you out of it because, you need these very real, grounded performances within the movie. What makes this one scary or a tough watch is how real the scenes of violence and death happen in this movie. So much so that you feel like sometimes you're watching a film that we're supposed to know that it's a movie and fake, but yet the way that it's filmed in those scenes makes it feel like they're trying to fool us into something where it is actually real and they're trying to tell us it's not. That's how real these scenes in this film look. And they're tough to watch. They don't hide anything. It's in full frame. They don't do close-ups on these things or anything. It's just someone's filming it and this is what's happening, and it's not nice. So that's why it's on the list, is because once again it's different, it's unique, and it's an interesting way of, once again, how you feel when you're watching this movie. So next up on the list is a film that I thought was going to be awful. I thought this film was going to be shit. And written down on paper, you would think it's just going to be a run-in-the-mill, typical found footage horror that, as I say, you just think is going to be a film that you can put on, never have to think about again. And I was completely wrong. So when I first watched this, I used to live with a group of friends, and every night, pretty much every night, we would just sit there and watch a horror movie. And I remember apologising to all of them beforehand, saying, look, I don't know what this is going to be like, so if it's rubbish, I apologise. And I was completely wrong. And afterwards, everybody in that room was ridiculously surprised at how good this movie was. That film is Grave Encounters. This film knows exactly what it is, what it's trying to be, and does it at an expert level. And that's probably an understatement. It's so good, this movie, and it's way better than I would have ever thought. The scares in this movie feel modern or fresh. I always remember sitting there, and essentially one of the first things that happens is the woman's hair gets lifted up when they're calling out and they're down that corridor. And I remember sitting there and I was just like, that is amazing. And what a first introduction to what's going to come ahead. Once again, it's a film that feels real. It feels very grounded. It feels very claustrophobic. It feels that you're in that asylum or abandoned hospital, whatever it is. It feels like you're there with them. And the cast are fantastic. They're fantastic at the start when they're essentially taking the piss out of all these ghost hunters or whatever, and all these ghost hunters go to these places where they're calling out the ghosts, and then as soon as something happens, they run and hide, which I've never understood. And Ghost Adventures do that really well. As soon as things start happening, they start to panic, and then it just gets worse and worse and worse for them. Now, the sequel's not on the list because as a sequel, yeah, it's all right, but I feel like it took the story too far. Once again, found footage movies work the best when there's that realistic element to them, where you feel like you're with them and you're there, and anything could happen to you as like it does with them. And Grave Encounters is a very, very good example of that. Next up is the newest entry on here. It is a film that most people who have listened to my podcast or watched YouTube or been on my social pages will probably know that it's going to be on this list. I mean, how could it not? And I'm talking about Deadstream. Deadstream is amazing. If you haven't seen this movie, you need to see it because you are in for a ride. This film is so much fun. It's insane. It's expertly crafted once again. It isn't a film that necessarily makes you feel like you're in the environment that you're in. It doesn't really necessarily suck you in because it's essentially like an Evil Dead 2 on found footage with elements of, say, like House in it. It's a very weird film. It's just an insane movie. But it's unapologetic in who or what and how it is. It's amazing. It truly is a fantastic modern horror, not just in found footage, but just within the genre. I love this movie. Joseph and Vanessa Winter, they are a husband and wife duo, but a power couple in horror. They directed this movie. Joseph Winter is in the movie. He did the soundtrack to it, which once again, I absolutely love how they integrate music into this movie by just essentially pressing a cassette player. There's so much thought and little bits that go into this movie that make it great. And it is one of those films that is definitely going to be here on a lot of people's lists of favourite found footage movies. It was on my favourite list of all the movies of 2022. Is in my top 5. And this is definitely going to be one of those films that you feel that you can put on at Halloween and around that season and just enjoy it, put it on, have a laugh. And I can't wait to see what comes next from these amazing directors. But for now, we've got Deadstream, and it's hilariously good fun. So once again, if you haven't watched it, you need to. And lastly, I've got a film that essentially restarted it all. And you probably thought, why has he not got it on the list? And to be fair, it is also a film that doesn't really appear on everybody's list because it has a love-hate relationship. You either love this film or you really don't like it. And obviously, I'm talking about the iconic The Blair Witch Project. Now, my story with this film goes all the way back to when it was released. It came out when, over in this country, in the UK, it was a 15 certificate. I was only 14 at the time. I didn't look anywhere, like I always looked young for my age. So I had to buy a ticket for another film and sneak in to see The Blair Witch Project because I didn't want to miss it. I was already a massive horror hound at that point. It was already consumed my life. So there was any chance that I could go and see any of them at the cinema, I would. And I snuck in to see The Blair Witch Project. And I never regretted it. But also, I sort of did because it's one of those films that can definitely give you this fucking nightmares that you've never had before. It was such an experience because at that time, I don't know if I had ever really seen, at 14, I don't know if I'd ever seen a found footage horror, or if I had, I didn't really know at the time, but it blew my mind because once again, it is a film with the greatest marketing ever in film. It is a film that cost nothing and made 248 million. It is a film that has been continuously replicated even to this day. They're always looking still to this day to find new ways to revive the franchise, and I'm sure there'll be another one at some point. But the Blair Witch Project is iconic, and it's iconic for so many reasons. But as a film on its own, I absolutely love it. A lot of people have problems with the fact that, I mean, for one, nothing really happens in it. I mean, let's face it, even as somebody that loves it, not that much happens in it. But it's about the impact and the delivery of when it does. And when it does, it's terrifying. And you feel you are there with them, knowing that the fact that at the time they were saying that this movie is real. This is real found footage. This actually happened. They don't know anything about it. These were obviously unknown actors and actresses. It was just a fantastic time for this film, you know, to come out. A fantastic time for horror, because it was something fresh, something new, and it was terrifying for an audience. So it has to be on this list. Not only because of how good I think the movie actually is, and how I think it still had one of the best endings to a movie, not just in horror, but the impact of that ending is absolutely insane, and it is always essentially scarred into your brain when you see it. You'll never forget the Blair Witch Project, and you never forget that ending. It's just such an incredible movie, but it's also about what it did for horror is what's insane. And what came after it is loads more of this. And then I get to sit here and talk about a list of top 10, mostly because of it. So that is all of my personal favourite top 10 found footage movies. And you're probably thinking there's loads on there that I've left off that you've seen and that I should have on that list, but I don't. But if there's films that I haven't mentioned, let me know in the comments. I always want to watch horror, I always want to watch these films, and I have got a few notable mentions as well that may be horror, that might not be horror, but these might be the ones that you're thinking of anyway. So the first one is The Dirties. Now, this is a film that hardly anybody's really heard of, but it is ridiculously good. Now, it isn't a horror in regards to essentially blood and guts and monsters and whatever. It's, for me, it is the storyline and it is the drama of the movie, and the way that it makes you feel as a viewer is the horrible element of it. It's insane. Dirties is directed incredibly well by some very young people making this movie, and it is just incredibly intense, and it is one of those films that has you on the edge of your seat, and also at so many points you almost want to turn it off because you know where this is going, and even though you're really intrigued and interested in knowing where it's going, you don't know if you want to go that far with it. So if you've never seen The Dirties, go and watch it. It's not a proper horror, so that's why it's not on my top 10. Otherwise, it would be. The Host is another one. It is a horror, but it's only about 60 minutes. But the reason that I wanted to mention it is because it's just the technical achievement that they managed to do with this film. It was shot during lockdown, so all the actors, the actresses, anybody within the movie had to do their own stuff and talked through it essentially through Zoom or Skype or whatever they use, and that's insane. They had to do stunts, they had to do this, they had to do that. They had to essentially become their own directors and actors within this meeting that they were doing through Zoom or whatever. It's insane what they managed to achieve with this film, but they also did it at really to a high degree. It's a fantastic movie, really done well. It was just, you know, a little bit short to make a full list. Then the other thing that I have to mention is one of, if not the greatest, short film or short segment of a horror film ever made. Now, we have loads of VHS movies. 1, 2, 3, I don't know, 94, was that the latest one they brought out? I don't know. They all merge into one. But in VHS number 2, there was the segment Safe Haven, which is directed by Gareth Edwards, who is the director of The Raid, Raid 2, just absolutely incredible things. The Raid and The Raid 2 are two of the greatest action films of all time. But this guy directed the segment and Safe Haven, and it is, to this day, one of, if not my favourite short segments in cinema. It's absolutely insane. It's mental where it goes. It just keeps on ramping it up. It's insane. If you've never seen Safe Haven segment on VHS, just go to YouTube. I'm sure you can just find that bit. I watch it every now and again, just that part, because it's absolutely incredible. So you've got to watch that. The other one, Paranormal Activity, I was going to mention. It's not on the list because, quite frankly, I'm not a massive fan of it. I like it, I enjoy it, but it just did a big thing for horror. Once again, it made found footage another big thing to go to for cinema, where they wanted to make money, because it did, very much like Blair Witch. It was made for a small amount, made a load of money. But it's just, it plods along, that film. It is what it is. and it's not something where I feel massively involved with, but I know that it is on a lot of people's lists as well, but I can't see why it wouldn't be. It's just not on mine. The other one is Lake Mungo. That is another one that almost made the list, but it's another film that I couldn't massively connect with. The reason I like it is because it's an interesting idea, and it is original, it is unique, but it only really has one proper super moment in it where you're like, okay, that's pretty messed up, that's well done, but it wasn't enough to take take something away from the list. But there's loads more found footage horrors out there. There are still some that I haven't seen. One of the films that I really want to see that you're thinking probably should be on my list is Hell House LLC, because I haven't seen it, because in this country it's not all that easy to get hold of, so I still haven't. So when I can, I will see it. Maybe it will make my top 10, and then I have to do this video all over again. But that's it. So I hope that you've enjoyed this. If you have, please subscribe. I'm always trying to do videos as much as I can, but I don't just make them for the sake of it. If I've got something to talk about, I think something's interesting, I'll put it on here. But in regards to where the channel goes in the future, there's some really cool, interesting things. Next evolution of the channel is definitely going to be on YouTube. So please, if you haven't already, subscribe. I really hope you enjoyed this video. Keep being on this journey through horror with me. Join us and be a creep.